algae bloom. For a number of years, I worked on the Sea of Galilee in Israel, where I got associated with algae. Okay, I worked there identifying them, and that got me interested in algae. Okay, and so what we're going to do today is talk about one of the hazards of algae. But I want to point out that algae are very important for the functioning of the planet. Okay, they represent 40% of the oxygen that we get, because diatoms in particular, a certain type, gives us oxygen. But there's also a downside, and that is now due to the problem of overpopulation and overpollution and things like this, we are increasing the algae. And a lot of these algae bloom. What do we mean by a bloom? A bloom is where you have a tremendous number of them per milliliter or liter of water. As you see this fish, it's unfortunately washed up on the shore. It looks like pea soup. That is a bloom where you have millions of algae, okay, per liter, and sometimes millions per milliliter. And many of these are toxic. So I'm going to discuss these today, the various types. But first, I want to give you an introduction to what algae are, and there are many types. So next slide, please. And I just want to show you a couple of blooms. There, that's a bloom taken by satellite. As you can see, that's in the ocean. That's what a bloom, and here you see the houses. So you see these things are quite extensive. And unfortunately, many of them are toxic. And here we see another one. Keep going. There's a couple more. I just want to show you some pictures of these, and then we're going to continue. Here we see some ducks. I don't think they're too happy swimming in something that's as green as pea soup. Go ahead. Next. Okay, now let's discuss first of all what are algae. And I want to point out that many algae now, there's a lot of research on algae, and we use a lot of products of algae for medicinal purposes. Okay, we find that some of them are able to treat cancer and other diseases. And unfortunately, some of them, of course, as I'll talk to you in a few minutes, cause diseases. So let me explain what algae are. Algae are a diverse group of aquatic organisms which most conduct photosynthesis. You do have some algae which do not contain chlorophyll. So these obviously don't perform photosynthesis, but others do. And certain algae are familiar to most people, for instance, such as seaweeds. And seaweeds are these large, plant-like plants that you see. Well, they're actually algae in the ocean, such as kelp. Now, I want to point out something about seaweeds too. When you go outside, you will all see weeds at this time of year, just so they mention that. All right, now.
Don't pull them out.
Okay. Then we have pond scum and algal blooms in lakes. And by the way, it's not only the oceans that have lakes. You can have ponds, rivers, and the ocean also, and lakes have it. Now, the types of algae we have are two types based on their cells: the eukaryotic, which are what the majority are, and then those which are related to bacteria, called the cyanobacteria, and these are the prokaryotic algae, and I'm going to show you these too because both types can cause problems. Next. Now, as I just mentioned earlier, there are two types, eukaryotic and prokaryotic. That happens to be a diatom. Now, what I have here is I put the major groups of algae that we see here. These are all the eukaryotic algae. There's actually more, but these are the only ones I'm going to talk about today. We have the brown algae. These are the large seaweeds. We have the Glenophyta. These are real interesting organisms. These in particular can both eat and photosynthesize. It's quite interesting. If these go into a pipe or something like that, where there's no sunlight, they might turn into something called a holotrophic type of nutrition, where they will actually eat instead of holophytic, which means instead of having a photosynthetic type. And then we have the red algae. These are the seaweeds. And as a matter of fact, yesterday I spoke about how by feeding a certain algae to cows, it reduces the methane production. And that one happened to be a red seaweed that I spoke about yesterday, low methane cows. This is probably the most notorious group of algae. These are the dinoflagellates, and these are the ones that cause real hazardous blooms. And one of the major diseases is paralytic shellfish poisoning due to these, because if you eat oysters and clams, and I'll talk about that later on, which have eaten these, you can get sick. In other words, you can die within a half hour or two, depending on how concentrated it is. Then we have the diatoms. This group also causes something called domoic acid, and that causes amnesic shellfish poisoning, and we'll go into that too. And then these are the green algae. These are probably the least toxic ones of all. And so these are the major types, although we do have others, but I'm just showing you some of the major. Next, we should go, here are some examples of the algae. You can see here we have the diatoms, we have the brown seaweeds, more diatoms, that's the Xenophyta. This is algae green. We also have a lot of green algae called sea lettuce. Why is it called sea lettuce? Because it actually looks like lettuce. It grows real big. And that's called ulva. That's the genus, but that's not harmful. It just makes big mats on the ocean, near the land, near the shore. Next, over here, these are the cyanobacteria. These are the prokaryotic organisms, and those of you who studied biology know that prokaryotic organisms do not have a nuclear membrane, okay? They have something called a nucleoid. They generally only have one chromosome in the area, in the nuclear area, called the nucleoid. And so that's interesting. We're going to talk about these too. And these are quite interesting because this particular one contains something, a round cell called a heterocyst, which is used for nitrogen fixation. And that is what makes these multiply like crazy too, when there's low nitrogen in the water. And I'll explain that in a few minutes. Okay, next, here we have two terms that we use dealing with organisms in the water. We have the phytoplankton, which means the little algae type, which move around the water by themselves with the waves. And then we have the zooplankton, which are little animals that eat the algae, okay? Over here, we have the various types of algae. Notice the shapes. We have star shapes. We have round, that looks like a wheel. This one's called a serratium. It has horns. That one is a green algae, more dinoflagellates, green. We have a whole bunch of them. And these are eaten by the zooplankton. I'm going to show you what the zooplankton are next, because these could be affected by the algae as well. Over here, we have the most common animal on the planet, yet I would bet nobody in this room has ever seen it. This is called a copepod, okay? There are trillions of these, okay, based on number of individual organisms. They range in size from less than a millimeter to over an inch. Some of those that are an inch are parasitic on whales and things like that. But all these are the actual animals which eat the algae, okay? So these are called zooplankton, all right? Okay, I wanted to show you those. All these are very important for the proper functioning of the planet, okay? Okay, next. Okay, now, let's go into the algal blooms. Algal blooms is a rapid growth of microscopic algae or cyanobacteria in water, often resulting in a colored scum on the surface. You may have 1,000 or more to a million cells per liter. Many are toxic and cause severe disease. And I know I repeated myself, and if you wonder why I repeat myself sometimes, because I also drive an Echo, and in addition to my electric car. Okay, next. And here we have the causes of the blooms. And like the part of the discussion is why do we have so many? And these are the real reasons. We have too many nutrients, such as phosphorus and nitrates. I want to point out that these are the major chemicals that you buy if you have a lawn, because algae are plants and they also eat the same type of stuff. We call it eating. Of course, they don't eat the mouth, some of these, but they absorb it. When you have too many phosphates and nitrates, it increases the nutrient load. Therefore, these things are going to multiply like crazy. And I should point out, someone asked me, said, Dave, why are algae smarter than politicians in Washington? Because the answer is simple. They can multiply and divide without a calculator. Now, here we have another problem called CAFOs. And this is a real serious problem due to the human overpopulation. As we know, a lot of people like to eat meat. And when you eat meat, you have something called CAFOs, which is concentrated animal feeding operations. And I'm sure you've all seen these in chicken coops, and there used to be the stockyards in Chicago. They got rid of those, but that was a CAFO too, because they kept all these cows together and they have to eat, and they produce a lot of waste, and this causes a problem. And sometimes the waste goes into the water, such as what happens in pig farms in North Carolina, and that caused a problem with something termed the cell from hell called Listeria pesticida. And I'll tell you a little bit about that too here. So we have all these issues with these, and that made the Neuse River quite toxic. Okay, and as a matter of fact, in one of the books I wrote, I have a topic about that. And since it's called the Neuse River, I say, no news is good news. It sounds like news. Yes, news is bad news because it sounds like news. And I'm going to go into that too. Okay, next.
There's also a talk on factory farming this Thursday and Friday. This is hard to factory farming is public health and also.
Oh, good. Yeah, I didn't know that. Anyway, here we see examples of toxic algae. And this is one group called the dinoflagellates. These are probably the most notorious ones, okay? Many are quite interesting. And these are all taken with the scanning electron microscope. So in a way, they look three-dimensional. And by the way, we have this type of scope here at Oakland. We own 2 of these scanning electron microscopes, one on each campus. And I have used that because I have taken photographs with it. So anyway, these are the dinoflagellates. And most of these are mainly marine, but there are some freshwater ones, but the freshwater ones are not toxic. There's some of the marine ones, the ocean ones, which are more toxic. Now, so let me go into a little bit more. Yeah, go back to this one here. We see, go back to this one. This is called Torrenia brevis. This is one of the most toxic ones. And by the way, why do I pick this one in particular? Again, this is scanning electron micrograph, because this was off the coast of Florida a few months ago, okay? This is one of the toxic ones. And here, off the coast of Florida this year, okay? And that caused brevetoxin. And so let's go. Oh, by the way, before you change, these are the flagellum. They have 2 flagellum. That's how they move. They have one trailing flagellum and one longitudinal flagellum. Okay, they have 2, and that's quite interesting. And by the way, I want to point out something real interesting about these. Those of you who study biology and cells know that the cells have something called a histones. You know, histones are like a spool for thread, and the DNA and the chromosomes is wrapped around the histones. Well, these do not have histones. So what that means is the chromosomes are permanently condensed, which means they're thickened. So that's what makes them incredibly interesting. Okay, next. And here we see the Listeria pesticida, the one I told you that is known also as the cell from hell in the Neuse River. And what makes this incredibly interesting is that you see this? It looks kind of strange here. There are 23 stages in its life cycle. Isn't that something? 23, which is probably more than any other type of algae that they figured out. And this one causes lesions in fish, and it affects humans as well. They get lesions on their body. The fishermen do. Okay, next. Here we see another one, Alexandrium. This one's involved in paralytic shellfish poisoning. It used to be called Ganilox, but they changed the name. Keep going. This one is not a poison one, but this one produces ammonia in the water. There are no chloroplasts here, which means these types don't photosynthesize, but you find these in the Middle East, and they're actually quite big. You can almost see them with the naked eye, and their toxicity comes from too much ammonia being produced. Okay, next. Now, I want to show you harmful dinoflagellates. Let's see if we can. I want to show you how these things multiply, because these are real interesting. Yeah, we got this up. This one's quite interesting. I'm going to go into the 3 major ones. So let's start with the dinoflagellates. Okay, first, can we get down here? Yeah, cysts of dinoflagellate. A cyst is, it's a dormant stage, okay, where the nuclear material is sort of covered. And these things stay as a cyst until environmental conditions are right. Go on to 2, then they germinate. Now, germinate does not mean move to Germany, it means to grow, just thought I'd mention that, okay? And when they germinate, you have all these other conditions, and then when you have enough nutrients, and then some of these produce sexually, they produce gametes, gamete, either egg or sperm, and then they fertilize and then they produce the organisms. Okay, I didn't want to go into more detail. That's good enough. Okay, next slide. Yeah. All right. There. Here we see the diatoms, and these are quite interesting. Look at them. Now, what's a diatom look like? You ever see a little box? You have a box and you have a cover. These things are like petri dishes. You don't know what a petri dish is? We raise bacteria. They're round and they have a cover. So that's the way these things too look exactly like that. They have a cover called, these are called a frustule or a valve. You have one that covers the other. And the way they reproduce is they keep getting smaller until they form a special spore, and then they'll just go back in size again. And these are quite interesting, aren't they? Look at the shapes. Isn't that amazing? There are thousands of different shapes. You have the round ones called centric, and then you have the bowl-shaped ones called pennate. And there's a couple of these species which cause a toxin, and I'll get into that in a moment. Well, in a few minutes, because I want to give you a rundown of the general types. All right, let's go to the next. Here's a picture of the diatom, as you see with the scanning electron microscope. These are the valve with the frustule. And here you see the top of the, this is like the bottom of the box. There's the cover of the box that fits just like a box. Isn't that incredible? And you need these holes called puncta, because actually some of these move. And how do they move? They don't have a flagellum or anything like that. They ooze out some sort of substance, and they move that way. Quite interesting. And by the way, the valves are made out of silicon. Here we see the one that produces the malic acid, which is there. This causes amnesic shellfish poisoning. Isn't that a cool looking organism? These are all individual cells, and they go. This is called pseudonychia, multi-series, where they exist this way. And they produce this acid. Now, can you imagine, and this is a true story, you go to a restaurant, you eat whitefish, okay? Then you leave the restaurant, you go to your car, and you forget how to get home. Well, that happened once because a person obviously went to this restaurant and he ate whitefish that probably ate the algae and that accumulated in the body of the fish. So he forgot where he was going. And more on that later. It was fun. Let me show you how these things multiply. These are the diatoms. And let's go through. There we go. See? That's what these are the pennate diatoms. This particular, oh God, it says pseudonychia there. That's good. This is the pseudonychia, the one I told you that produces the malic acid. It's amnesia shellfish poisoning. Let's look at second so we can get that. Yeah, so they divide asexually, which means they split this way. The frustules break apart. Okay, keep going. And then they produce cells like this. We don't have to go into it. But anyway, that's what happens. They multiply. I don't want to spend too much time on this. But then they multiply like that, and then they wind up with two cells. Now, of course, you can take a course. By the way, if you want to study algae, there's a special name. It's called phycology. Phycoly. It sounds like psychology, but it's phycology. So anything with the prefix phyco, Phyco, refers to algae. Okay? So you study phycology. Now, I want to show you the cyanobacteria. This is by far the most interesting because these things produce toxins when there's less nitrogen in the water. And how is that possible? And by the way, one more thing. See this picture here? This particular one is very interesting. It's called Prochlorococcus. This Prochlorococcus was just discovered, believe it or not, in 1985 by a woman called Penny Chisholm. And what makes this one so interesting, they figured out how many tons there are in the world. And what they did was they used the old Volkswagen Beetles as a reference. There are 200. Remember, each one of these is incredibly small, but they figure if you took them out all together, they would weigh the equivalent. Get this, 220 million Volkswagen Beetles. You can imagine how much each one weighs and multiply how many zillions of these could even make 1 pound. And then you put each Volkswagen weighs 1,789 pounds. That's the old Volkswagen Beetles, okay? So that can imagine. All right, let's go back to the next one. Let me show you how this thing multiplies. One more. Should be much more. We don't have it. Okay, this one multiplies it away. Let me tell you what happens. When you have less nitrogen in the water, other organisms cannot live. But this one can live because he fixes nitrogen. What does that mean there? That should do it. This one. What do I mean by fixing nitrogen? Oh, evidently, well, all right, forget it. Fixing nitrogen means to incorporate the nitrogen. So when these other algae are in the water, they cannot survive because there's no nitrogen. But these things fix it, which means their cells allow the nitrogen from the air. By the way, I should point out that the majority of the air we're breathing in this room is 78.09% nitrogen. Oxygen makes up 20.94%. And then all the other gases make up the less than 1%. See that? So the majority of the air you breathe here is nitrogen. I know most people think it's oxygen, but if it were oxygen, somebody lights a match and the whole world will blow up, literally. Okay. Okay, so we can't have more than 25% max oxygen in the atmosphere, or it would be dry and we'd see a lot of fire, you know, it'd be very bad. Okay, let's go on to the next. Okay, now here we see a whole bunch, this chart shows you what happens here when you have a lot of population. You have increased blooms because you have a lot of fertilizers going into the water, and then you have a bunch of, you have too much biological activity. It's going to die, decompose, settle to the bottom, use up more oxygen, and this creates conditions which are not good. And we use a term BOD, which means biochemical oxygen demand, which means the more dead material we have, the higher the BOD increases. In fact, this is how they measure sewage treatment too. They use this term BOD, biochemical oxygen demand. And when the sewage goes in to the sewage treatment plant, it has a very high BOD measured in milligrams of oxygen per liter. When it leaves, it has a 95% reduction in the BOD, or it should. Okay, let's go on to the next picture because this one's sort of better. It summarizes everything here. And when you have situations such as stratification, which means temperature differences in the water, you have, again, the situation which allows these organisms to multiply like crazy. To see what here happens, a lot of organisms die, and these things will release phosphorus and nitrogen, and that will feed the bloom of the algae. See it? You know, because they need nitrates and phosphorus. All right, let's go on. Now, these are the type of toxins produced by the algae. I'm sure none of you like these. We got nerve toxins, and I should point out at times I got on many people. And then we have hepatotoxins, which are liver toxins. Okay, then we have cytotoxins, kill the cells. Endotoxins, these are lipopolysaccharides, which means you have sort of a fat and sugar together. Then you have this one. I'm going to talk about this one specifically, BMAA. It's a neurotoxin, but it also has been implicated. Ready for this? In Guam, I'll go into that too, in causing ALS, that's amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, better known as Lou Gehrig's disease, as well as Parkinson's disease. So that this was a major discovery, and they did this in the Chamorro people of Guam. I'll go into that too, because I feel that you should know, especially these interesting ones. And of course, those of you in the medical profession will be interested. All right, keep going. Next. Okay, these are some of the toxins. This is just a few of the many types of toxins. I put them all together. Okay, isn't that interesting? We have many toxins, and now more are even being discovered. Okay, and this was the one, well, Pfisteria that I told you took place in the Neuse River. Okay, some of you've never heard of some of these, but some of these are quite deadly. Okay, next. And here we see some more of these. Okay, and toxins. And these are the actual names of the diseases. And I want to point out that we have a doctor here who teaches at Open, and he's collaborating with me on a book. Actually, on all my books, he collaborated with me. And he wrote a whole bunch of information about each of these toxins. That's going to appear in the second edition of my second book called Prognosis Disaster. Very optimistic title. And by the way, we're going to give away a copy here at this campus as well as the other campus. Those of you who signed up, I think there's a drawing or something like that. And both my books are going to be given away. I have two of them. The Earth is My Patient and Prognosis Disaster.
And Professor Jacob.
Yeah, that's the doctor, Jacob Nieve. He's the doctor. He teaches here. He's very good. He's from the Philippines. He teaches anatomy and physiology here. I think it's on Saturday all day. And then, now I want to talk to you specifically about this particular one first, BMMA and ALS. Okay, this is the Chamorro people of Guam. This is Guam. Now, if you could just click on that. I just want to show you the medical information on that. Just real brief. All you got to do is click on that. No, you got to click on it. You click on the where it says that should do it. Just click on that. That should do it. Yeah, see, that's what we got to do. Now, you don't have to go down here, but I want to show you. This is from an article, okay, from Public Med. And this shows you beyond one, the cyanobacteria BMAA hypothesis of the cause of ALS and neurodegenerative diseases. Okay, so this is something that's been recently discovered, and let me explain to you what has happened here, how they figured that particular one out. How did the Chamorro people get this? Well, very simple. It has to do with the food chain. What happens is that there's an algae called nostoc, which produces this, and that grows on the roots and other areas, and bats would eat the algae. You see, inadvertently in their food, they would eat the plant material. The BMMA is in the algae, and then the Chamorro people will eat the bats. So that's like going up the food chain, and we call that biomagnification. It's a common term we use in environmental science and in the marine environment where things move up the chain. This is why we have a big issue with DDT in the marine system. You know, that's the dichloro, diphenyl, trichloro.
But also microplastics. These studies are
Yeah.
coming out where fish are eating microplastics and it's accumulating.
It accumulates
Fish too.
in the chemicals.
So we're getting the implications of eating plastic. And also this plastic is so porous that it attracts pollutants in the water, so it also like fish.
Yeah, and there's a reason why animals eat the plastic. And that's to do with algae, because the algae grow on it, and then it produces substances. So the animal that eats the plastic thinks he's eating the plant that contains those called metabolites or whatever the algae are producing. See, it's quite interesting, all this stuff. And so here, go up there a little bit more on this. Because here it says something real interesting. It says, it's going to read the first couple of sentences. Excitement about neurogenetics in the last 2 decades has diverted attention from environmental causes of sporadic ALS. 50 years ago, endemic foci of the ALS with a frequency 100 times that of the rest of the world attracted attention. A frequency 100 times, look at that. ALS, Parkinson's disease, and dementia. Okay, and that had to do with the people there who ate the bats, and they picked up this particular toxin called the malic acid.
So is there a percentage of people on Guam that would have this?
Yeah, I don't know. Let's go back to that and see what it says. I don't know the exact number, but that's a good question. Here, go down a little bit. This is just the abstract. Let's see what it says. I don't know. This tells you about assay and how they do it. There's a lot of literature on that. Well, we can look it up, the exact percentage.
I'm just assuming that they started doing these tests because a lot of people might have been affected by it. And, they're trying to find a crime, but very interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, it's almost like you're afraid to eat.
I know. No, you got a good point.
Or you don't really know what you're eating, even though,
Well, you hope you know what you're eating, but you never know. Here it says, look, cyanobacteria are ubiquitous throughout the world, and all humans are exposed to low amounts of cyanobacteria, BMMA. See? And again, that stands for beta-methylamino L-alanine, which is a non-proteinaceous amino acid. Okay, in other words, what would be non-proteinaceous? There are 20 amino acids that make your proteins in the body. Proteins are made up of amino acids. But this is an amino acid that is not involved in protein synthesis. You are all mainly involved with 20 amino acids, and this is not one of them. There are 20 amino acids involved in, protein. You heard of protein, fats, proteins, carbohydrates. This is the stuff that you eat, you learn in nutrition. But this is one amino, by the way, I want to point out amino acids are really nice. They're not bad acids. They're not mean. Sulfuric acid is mean, but you get the idea. Just thought I'd mention that. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Oh, by the way, one more thing. Go back again 1 second. Here you see Guam, where it sits in the middle of the Pacific. So it's like an isolated islands there. See it? It's far away from anywhere. So why would these people get something like this unless there's a good reason for it? See? And you would expect that reason because algae grows anywhere. As long as you have sunlight and nutrients, that's it. Okay, go on to the next one. Now, how do you measure toxins resulting from algae? Believe it or not, we use a method called a mouse unit. I'm sure none of you ever heard of it. It's mainly used in the marine environment, especially for algae, okay? And so and you're going to see this. This is the abbreviation. I studied this stuff, okay? A mouse unit is the amount of toxin required to kill a 20-gram mouse in 15 minutes via intraperitoneal injection. And that's also IP, which means it's in the peritoneum, right? That's this area here, okay, of the mouse, okay? Other than feeding, right? You're not feeding it, you're injecting it. And so that's what it means. Mouse units are measured by a mouse bioassay, and they're commonly used in the shellfish industry in describing relative toxicities, okay, of assessing food safety levels for consumption. And shellfish are very important in this aspect. And why specifically shellfish? Because you got to understand their way of eating, you see? They're filter feeders. So what that means is they generally have two siphons. Siphon. Water goes in, called the internal siphon, and the external siphon is where the water goes out. And if there's bacteria, algae, viruses, they trap it in their bodies, you see? And of course, if you eat algae, if you eat clams and oysters that were actually harvested during a toxic bloom, you're going to be in trouble. And of course, again, the most common disease of that is paralytic shellfish poison. Just by the name is enough to scare you, because if you don't, and by the way, cooking does not really kill the toxin, because in other words, this toxin is not heat labile, which means it doesn't get destroyed with cooking. So that's another problem. Some people eat oysters with beer and stuff. You hear about that. I don't know, I put beer in the oysters and they cook them that way. And if you have a lot of toxin, you could start feeling the symptoms within a half hour. You have tingling in your mouth, you have trouble breathing, and some people have died, So it's probably not a good idea to eat shellfish anywhere, okay? Because you don't know where it comes from or when it came from. You understand? They might say it's safe, but you don't know. Most likely the restaurants are safe. And what they do in the case of oysters, they put them in a depuration plant. What that means is they take the oysters where they come from and they put them in fresh water for about 72 hours, and that cleans them out. That's called depuration, from the word purify. See, called depuration plant. Okay, let's go into the next one. Now, these are the foods likely to be contaminated. Oysters, clams, scallops, mussels, tacos, these are all shellfish, crabs and fish, or crabs. Some, I guess you might consider shellfish. By the way, did you all hear of the expression roar of the ocean? You've all heard of that, right? When it makes a lot of noise. So someone asked me, said, hey, Harriet, you know why the ocean roars? I said, sure. You'd roar too if you had crabs on your bottom. But anyway, okay, let's continue with the next one. Now, here we see world locations of toxic algal blooms, okay, as of 2016. If we look here we have amnesic shellfish poison. Again, that's caused by domoic acid. Then we have paralytic shellfish poisoning. That's also caused by something called saxitoxin. And that's the reason why it's called saxitoxin, because it comes from a clam called Saxidomus, where they first discovered it, okay? A lot of these diseases are named after the organism where either it came from or the genus of the algae or something like that. As you can see, look at that. quite a bit, say there. And then diuretic shellfish poisoning, picking up too. And then neurotoxic shellfish poisoning, not as prevalent, but nevertheless, it's there. Let's go on to the next one. Now, I want to point out something about biosafety areas. There are many locations that examine very hazardous organisms, okay? And one of them is the CDC, another one is the USAMRIID, United States Army Research and Infectious Diseases Institute, okay? And they have to examine these things under special conditions. Now, here at Oakland, when we do microbiology, we have a level 1 where, you know, we're dealing with stuff that's not hazardous at all, basically, okay? You know, they take from the air, they examine, you know, simple organisms, they grow them, you know, nothing real toxic or hazardous, okay? So this is what we got, you know, you might wear gloves, maybe glasses, not much. Biosafety too, your specific training, and some pathogenic agents, but again, these are not really incredibly hazardous, okay? You still have to take precautions. And, you know, your cabinets and stuff, but you gotta be safe, real safe. Then we go to the next one. Let's look at biosafety level 3. That should be the next one. Here we see bio-level 3. It says, I don't want to get that yet. If we can see what that sign says, it says bio-level safety 3 is appropriate work for, let's say, serious and potentially lethal disease via the inhalation route. Now, this is the area where they look at certain of these algae, okay? Mentions inhalation. I want to point out something about inhalation. If you're on a boat and you go over a toxic bloom and you breathe the air, it'll make you sick, okay? There have been many cases of this because the ocean aerosolizes the spray, you understand? Turns it into aerosols and then you breathe it, okay? And that obviously is not good, okay? And so when you work in an area like this, look at that. He's got some air pumped in, he's wearing a whole face mask, everything like that. And Listeria pesticida is one of the ones that I mentioned earlier that are used in a level 3 facility. And what I have done, just to show you what they do in these level 3 facilities and the level 4 with a playfield video, we might as well show this video, what it looks like to get dressed up in one of these areas, because you really have to be really secure. Go ahead, let's see. Example is taking off the clothes. You can see how well dressed she is. See it? Face mask, hair pumped in. That's what's effective. I'm going to show you a level 4 facility. That one is really that's super hazardous, like Ebola virus. That's the level. Those everything. And now she's working with vitamin. So this is no laughing matter, but they can treat a lot of people. Sometimes you see, I'm not sure, level 4, they take 2 showers, and put all the clothes on you free with that, then they have a spacesuit on, shower in the spacesuit, take it off, and then they take another regular shower. All right, let's go on to the next one. I'm just showing you Go on to the next one. Okay, now, here is the level 4 facility. Notice, this is real tricky. This is with stuff like the Ebola virus, but maybe one day you're gonna find an algae that you have to work like this too, okay? I don't know, I'm just supposing. See, they're all in these spacesuits. This is where you have pumped air coming in from the outside. What I just showed you, they had a positive pressure suit, which means they had a belt with a battery, and that would push air in. Now, I use that myself because I work with asbestos also. I do asbestos air monitoring jobs, okay? During the summer, when the schools are out, I teach at night, and I do that during the daytime. And I've been doing that for 30 years as well. And we wear a positive pressure mask, which means we have a battery and the air gets pumped in. So if we have a hole, push stuff out instead of coming in, see? I should point out that whenever I work with asbestos, we have a motto, I always do as best as I can. Okay, now, press this button here and we'll see what it's like. It's just for 1 minute. Should have the sound there.
Scientists and technicians must pass through stringent security in order to enter a biosafety level 4 laboratory, where researchers study some of the world's most dangerous and infectious pathogens, such as the Ebola virus. Entrants shed their street clothes and put on scrubs. All personal items, except glasses, are not allowed inside. Another mandatory garment is a positive pressure suit, which has a hook connecting to ventilation hoses. Scientists and technicians, while still wearing their protective suits, must take a decontamination shower before they leave. Water and chemicals are sprayed to remove dirt, residue, and microbes. After taking off the suit, researchers must take a hot shower before changing into their own clothes and leaving the facility.
See, so that's how, it's like going to a spaceship, airlock, okay? Really be careful. Okay, let's go on to the next picture. Now, these are the symptoms associated with algae, okay? You have quite a few. I'm sure nobody wants any of these. And it's quite interesting. By the way, the word photophobia means you're afraid of sunlight or any light, okay? These are just some of the many symptoms that you can get when exposed to some of these toxic algae, okay? All right, let's go on to the next one. Now, here we see a list of emerging toxins. These I also mentioned in what I just told you a few minutes ago, but these are also under investigation now at the moment too, because you have quite a few of these. See it? Okay, so let's go on. I want to go into these. Now, this is something else I want to mention. This is a real interesting episode that happened in a place called Caruaru, Brazil in 1996, okay? There was this medical facility where they would do kidney dialysis, okay? And what happened was a number of people died undergoing dialysis. Now, normally you're not supposed, that doesn't happen. But what happened was, look, 100 patients developed acute liver failure, okay? Why? That was because, let me tell you, it was called Caruaru syndrome. Examination of previous year's phytoplankton, which are the algae we're talking about, found showed were dominant in the water of the reservoir, okay? And that evidently produced these toxins. The hepatotoxins, which affect the liver, and cyanotoxin is a toxin produced by the cyanobacteria, and microcystin, this is another one produced by an algae, a blue-green algae or a cyanobacterium. The cyanobacteria used to be called blue-green. What happens there is the microcystin is a toxin produced by the algae Microcystis. You see, so they named the toxin after the organism as well. So this is a problem. And by the way, this doesn't happen just in Brazil. In 2011, the Ohio, and I think it was Toledo or Cleveland, the water facility was infected with the microcystin, okay? And that made people sick in the United States, in Ohio. So that caused a major problem as well. So these things are ubiquitous all over the world, and there's something that we have to take into consideration. All right, let's go on to the next. Let's see if, this, by the way, was the abstract, okay? You see it? Okay, this was the abstract, and I don't know if you want to see it, but it just says in 1996, an outbreak of illness occurred in hemodialysis in Peru, in the state of Brazil. At the clinic, 116 out of 131 patients experienced visual disturbances, nausea, vomiting, and muscle weakness following routine hemodialysis treatment. Okay, this is essentially what it said before, but this is actually a better picture of it. Okay, 100 patients developed that, problem. Now, I want to show you that algae is a very big industry now, and we have a lot of literature devoted to it. And here we have a whole magazine that comes off every month called Harmful Algae. Look at that. And that's something, the fact that we know this is a big issue, the organizations are getting into it. And this is put out by Liz CR. They're quite an interesting book company. Some of the stuff's expensive, but nevertheless, they do a lot of good stuff. See that? Harmful algae. Okay? And then we have harmful algal blooms in drinking water. Okay, and these are just some of the books that we got at magazines. So we have a lot of magazines, we have a lot of books all devoted to algae, and some specifically with toxic algae. Let's see what this. So this shows you this is an up and coming situation here, and we all have to be wary of. Okay, let's see. I think now I want to play a movie for you about toxic algae. Only last couple of minutes. Like it. Yeah, this is a problem with this.
Marine and freshwater algae can sometimes grow out of control and produce toxins harmful to people and animals.
We can't make it bigger.
These harmful algal blooms, or HABs, can have severe impacts on public health, local economies, and coastal resources. Scientists are working to eliminate or control HABs in ways that are safe for people, wildlife, and the environment. For example, some naturally occurring marine bacteria can target and kill toxic algae. Researchers can inject these bacteria into inexpensive gel-like beads. These bacteria bullets can be deployed to areas of concern. Nanobubble aeration is also being investigated for HABs. Instead of rising and bursting at the water surface, nanobubbles implode under the pressure of the water, releasing oxygen and ozone that dissolve harmful algae. Clay, mixed with simple and safe polymers, can be sprayed onto the water to aggregate and sink harmful algae. Once sunk, the algae die and decay. These are just some of the things that scientists are doing to protect us from HABs.
So I just thought I'd show that because that shows you what's going on. So this is a big issue all over the world. And now with increased human population, people are putting more garbage in the oceans, not only plastic, but nitrates, phosphates, nutrients, raw sewage, things like this, which actually feed these organisms. And by the way, what you see here is I put all these on the slides. I make my own backgrounds. This is a boat in water containing a lot of algae. I just made it this way in all the slides just to show you. See that? In case you wondered what that was, I have a special device on my computer where we can get any picture we want. Edit there, I can make it bright, less, whatever. Transparency. Okay, so I think that's the last one. Correct. And here, another thing, yeah, glad you mentioned this. There are dozens of websites dealing with algae, okay? We have many of them, as Pete and myself are trying to figure out. We're actually going into these, find a lot of these. So again, I mean, probably every day we find new websites, okay, dealing with algae. So like I said, I don't want to repeat myself, but I'll do it anyway. This is a growing phenomena, and obviously a lot of organizations are getting involved because we have the future of the planet here. These things, especially when it comes to oxygen. Those of you who like to breathe, we better keep the algae here. It also acts as a food source for fish and other organisms. Okay, so are there any questions, comments, anything? Anybody? Then I want to thank you all for coming. And I'm giving another lecture tomorrow on capitalism, how capitalism is destroying the environment. And maybe you want to come to that one too. That'll be in the 104 outside around what time is it? One, I forget. I have it here. I'll show you the time. Yeah, I got my stuff here. Tomorrow, Wednesday, there'll be capitalism and the environment. That goes from 1 to 2:30 in room 204, which is right around the corner there. So I think you'd like it. I should point out I'm a Hellraiser. I tell it the way it is.
We got 100 people.
Yeah. Okay, well, again, thanks for coming.
Yeah,
Hope you
thank you for
enjoyed
coming,
it.
everyone. And I believe it's the Gulf of Mexico because Mississippi is like the green belt, right? And so we have a lot of nutrient pollution that travels down the Mississippi River that gets dumped in the Gulf Delta.
Oh, yeah.
It's one of the areas where we get close to the US where we get toxic algae. Another one is Lake Erie, because there's a lot of farmland there. And so the nutrients that get sprayed on the farmland end up in Lake Erie. And you can see pictures of Lake Erie. It looks green. It's not blue. It's like green and yellow.
That's why it's called Lake Erie. That's an eerie color.
Erie color. Well, thank you so much for coming. We
Oh, by the
have-
way, did you introduce yourself?
I'm Charmaine. I'm the sustainability specialist for Oakton. I just started with the college in December. Thank you.
So what about, like, we're talking about shellfish
Yeah.
and seafood and, so I'm just curious, like sushi, which is raw,
Yeah, raw fish, you know.
so, I mean,
By the way,
enough
sushi is
to
made
put
with
me off.
seaweed. You know, sushi is made with seaweed. I think it's nori. I think that's one of the types,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, I don't really eat it that, I've only tried it like twice, so I'm just
Yeah.
curious, I actually like,
I was at a sushi restaurant just the other night.
yeah,
My wife and my stepson
yeah.
really filled up on that stuff.
I
Now
know.